Hello and welcome to today's LSE public event on measuring the S in ESG, hosted by the Inclusion Initiative. We have a great lineup from a few different time zones here today to help us approach, frame, and measure the S in ESG. I will introduce them, each one of them, just before I invite them to make their opening remarks. But before that, a couple of things. Firstly, Dr. Grace Lordan, who we all know is the founding director of the Inclusion Initiative, or TII, here at LSE, is now also director of the brand new Growth and Governance Hub here at TII. This is a hub dedicated to the measurement of inclusion, not just for producing academic work, but to also impact shareholder decision. This is possible thanks to a generous donation from the Gnanalingam family. As an advisory board member of TII, I want to express our gratitude for the support and our excitement about the work of this new hub. Secondly, some admin points. This event is being recorded, and the video and podcast will likely appear on our website shortly. Secondly, we have 1 hour in total. Feel free to post your questions using the Q&A function on Zoom. In fact, please do that as quickly as you want to, so that we can make this as interactive as possible. Don't wait till the end. Post the questions as and when they occur to you. Please also keep them as brief as possible. As you can imagine, I'll be scrolling them in real time, so I really want to be able to pick up the questions. All right, so now I think we are ready to start the show. We'll go alphabetically in the order of the surnames. And first up is Fred Brettschneider, president of Libra Max Capital, where he's also chair of the Risk Management and Valuation Committees and a member of the Investment Committee. Prior to that, he was head of Global Markets Americas at Deutsche Bank. Fred, welcome, and your opening remarks, please.
Thank you. Very excited to be on the panel, and you know, at Libra Max we've been involved in ESG for quite some time. We actually have a green fund focused on really the E in ESG. So slightly different topic, but very excited, and looking forward to the panel.
Thank you. So you've got a fund focused on E. Is it conceivable there might be one focused on S?
You know, I would say it's conceivable, yes. Likely, possibly not. And
okay,
I imagine over the hour we'll go into this. It's just right. The E is a little bit easier to measure.
Okay, let's not give away any spoilers. So we'll move on now to Andrew Cohen. Andrew, Executive Chairman, Global Private Bank and a Global Chair of Investment Banking at JP Morgan. Andrew oversees JP Morgan's Private Bank's institutional wealth management practice and leads the partnership between the firm's investment bank and private bank. What a cool job. Andrew, welcome, and your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Lutfey. Pleasure, as per my previous colleague, pleasure and honor to be part of the LSE talk today. And Lutfey's an old friend. We have had many occasions to get together, but none quite like this. So I think, you know, really kudos to the LSE for putting on something. So it's correct. I am the executive chairman of the Global Private Bank. I sit in London and have been fortunate to work for this institution for 3 decades in all corners of the world, in Asia for 9 years, in the US, in the West Coast, and then in Europe and Latin America as well. 15 years in Europe my last time, and now based in London. So I know the event was postponed, so I'm really glad we can finally come together for this discussion today. It seems that everybody of the speakers is passionate. I'm sure the audience is too. For me, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is a component of the S, as Lutfey was referring to, in ESG, is something that we are very, very focused on at JP Morgan, not only to better our own company, but also ensure that we are serving our clients wherever we can and the communities that we engage with, right? You know, we have 2 main arms to JP Morgan in the United States. We have the Chase branch, which serves communities in all of the lower 48 states. excluding Hawaii and Alaska. And then obviously the JP Morgan business I'm part of, which is the wholesale business, we try and engage in that, and hopefully that will come through today. Thank you very much, Lutfey and team.
Thank you very much. That sets the scene very nicely, Andrew. So let me next introduce Ruben Gnanalingam, who is a board member of the Employees Provident Fund Malaysia and the Malaysia Productivity Corporation. He is the owner and vice chairman of Queen's Park Rangers Football Club. He's also a founder and board member of the Los Angeles Football Club, LAFC, and he serves as an executive council member of the Football Association of Selangor. Ruben, welcome, and your opening remarks, please.
Thank you, Lutfey. Like everyone else, I'm very excited to be here. Thank you, Grace, for setting all this up. You know, it's great. We started working with Grace about 2 years ago during the pandemic, and we found a niche, I guess, which needed to be explored. And that's why, from both my footballing backgrounds and also from the port background, which is where, you know, which is the real business, to be fair, we decided that, you know, the S wasn't measured enough. I think there was a lot of measurements for the E, and I think also a lot for the G, but, you know, the S seems to be, you know, tend to be left behind. And actually there was a specific focus we started off with, which was actually race. You know, I think there's a lot of measurements for gender already as well. When it comes to racial elements, people tend to shy away, and that's why we wanted something to actually measure race to begin with, in all honesty. It started because in football specifically, there are lots of activities which try to measure how inclusive teams are. But in all honesty, there are many, many teams which claim to be inclusive, but in actual fact are not very inclusive. And therefore, you know, as a measure, we can finally decide who's actually truly inclusive and who actually is not. And I think, you know, for me, as also a general consumer, I would like to buy stuff and consume from companies which are more inclusive than those who are not, if I had the chance. And I think that's one of the key reasons why measuring this S for me as a consumer and not just as an investor is also very crucial in terms of understanding where I want to put my money and who I want to give my money to. So for me, I think this was why it all started during the pandemic. It was all through Zoom. It was actually quite fun with myself, Grace, and Fiona, you know, trying to scheme through things as to how we could help the world. And I think this is what we came up with. Thanks. So I'm just glad to be here as well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Ruben, for your support and for your opening remarks. It really sets the scene. And you're right, it is a dimension that perhaps people do shy away from, and not just football, in cricket as well. In England right now, that is a highly topical issue. And I also can relate to the increasing demand from consumers to want to have, in the same way that we have labels on the calorie content and the sugar and fat content, why would we not want to know the inclusivity of the producers behind that? So I can relate to that. You know, in terms of race, I was on a panel in KL not too long ago, and they really took, actually this was now about 6 years ago or so, and they really took care to make sure that it's racially diverse, but they forgot, it was just a 5-member panel, so they couldn't really have a female, they forgot that. And the poor guys got vilified, and they said, look, we really took pains to make sure it's racially representative, but we really forgot that, so please go easy on us. So multi-dimensional inclusivity, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. Now on to Helen Krause, who is a managing director at LSETII. She's the head of data science insights at LSETII Group and the EMEA head of data, LSETII Global Data Insights, CGDI. Did I get that right? Okay. Helen has over 22 years of industry experience and leads the data science team that focuses on, amongst other things, ESG insights. Helen, welcome, and your perspective, please.
Thank you. Very nice to be here. So I'll just touch on my industry background. So I've been on actually buy side as well, on the sell side, pretty much a sort of equal amount of time. So that gives me an interesting perspective, you know, being able to see from the investment management perspective. And it was quite interesting that back then, a lot of talks about SRI, responsible investing, and so on. And back then, that's about 15 years ago, there was not really a big thing while people talk about that. I think a lot of kind of pushback was on the performance side. But it's interesting to see that in the last 5 years, things have changed dramatically. So a lot more focus on ESG. And that's also the reason why our team has started to focus along on how you measure ESG using alternative data. And that's where we could, obviously talk about it a little bit later, but specifically on inclusion, just to mention that we've been in the collaboration with Grace at LSE to look at the inclusion index, how we think about measuring that and look at different ways of bringing that more up to date. So, you can think about the data side could just be, ticking a box and say, okay, we have the equal opportunities, but are companies really doing that on the ground? So that's a topic that definitely is worth having a serious look, and that's actually quite a extensive research project that we currently have with Grace. So yeah, so happy to share a little bit more details as we go along.
Excellent, thank you so much, Helen. So the use of alternative data and looking beyond the box ticking exercise to see if it really corresponds to what's happening on the ground. And that brings us to Grace Lordan. Apart from being director of TII and at the Growth and Governance Hub, Grace is associate professor in behavioral science at LSE and author of the book Think Big. Grace, how should we think about S in ESG?
So I'm really fascinated about measuring the S in ESG because firstly, it is a socially responsible thing to do. I think it's fundamentally interesting to think about whether or not employees are included in their place of work and whether or not people are actually taking steps to address diversity that they might actually be missing. But I think the second part of it is that inclusivity is actually good for business. So the idea that if I bring together people who have diverse perspectives, I allow their voices to be heard, and we have somebody who's the leader of that group bringing together those ideas in a way that's better for business, is fundamentally really interesting to me. And through the Inclusion Initiative and our work now in the Growth and Governance Hub, what we're hoping to do is really measure inclusion using data outside the firm, which Helen, I think, will speak to a little bit later, which is a joint collaboration with LSETII, and also within companies. So for companies who might be looking at their diversity and thinking we're not necessarily leveraging the voices of all talent and they're observing this from the top, what can you actually do within the middle of the organization? And I think through measuring, fundamentally, we might actually see much more progress than we have in the last decade. So it's a win for people who care about social responsibility, but I think it's also a win for people who care about actually building better businesses.
Wonderful. That completes the first round of opening remarks, and I have follow-on questions for all of you. But let me start with Helen. Helen, you're the data scientist, so we'd like you to really set the scene with. Well, first of all, let me say this. You know the saying that what gets measured gets made and gets paid, but there's also the saying that not everything that counts can be counted. Is it really possible to measure the S in ESG? How do you do that? And are there some unintended consequences or side effects that we need to be mindful of?
Sure, thank you for the question. So I guess not surprisingly, the short answer is yes, you can. But before I elaborate a bit more on how we do that, let me just briefly talk about our ESG data journey. So we started to look at how to measure ESG performance outside of the company disclosure data back in 2018. Because back then the reporting wasn't mandatory and often disclosures were inconsistent or incomplete. And that's when we explore alternative data and AI machine learning, which could help in informing us how companies are really doing on the ground. So if you think about it amongst E and S and G, S probably was the least covered and not well understood until perhaps the arrival of COVID-19. So the pandemic put a spotlight on companies' focus on employees' health and safety, working practice, and particularly in terms of how companies are addressing disproportionate impact on diverse groups, such as women, people of color, and also working parents. So specifically on measuring the S, one can start looking at disclosure data, but as I mentioned, it's not mandatory, so you probably would not have the full coverage if you think about your investable universe. That's a typical where a company publish their policies surrounding social issues, such as if they have equal opportunity policies, if they provide some sort of gender pay gap analysis. And this type of data is useful, but it provides only a snapshot back in time and could be seen, as I mentioned earlier, as a ticking the box exercise. And to obtain a more up-to-date picture, and that's where alternative data comes in to the picture to fill the gap, data sources such as employee review sites and social media, for example, Glassdoor and Indeed, can really reveal how companies are doing in reality with regard to diversity and inclusion dimensions. And in addition, you can also think about news flow, and could be an interesting source on social issues. And it's becoming also quite common to use AI machine learning techniques to scan at scale into the news and also highlight the inclusion issues with the corresponding sentiment within those articles.
So is this a textual analysis? Do you look for keywords? Is that how it works?
Yeah, you can look for keywords. There's obviously tagging you need to do and make sure that you have a taxonomy surrounding those inclusion that you want to capture. And so, yeah, you do need to do quite a bit of homework before you can then say, okay, I can model that. But just an example, like, if you see like a lawsuit being reported in the news, filed by the former employees against unfair dismissal, that could be seriously damaging for company's reputation. And that would also negatively affect the market perception about that particular company. And in a way, it's the kind of third party or impartial assessment of how companies are performing versus something companies disclose that's basically what they say they are doing. So we are seeing that kind of more and more on the investor side where the two sides need to come together. So yes, we have the disclosed data from company where available, but quite often you want some sort of ground truth to help you understand whether a company is doing what they're saying they're doing, or maybe they're actually making improvement instead of waiting for the next round of reporting, which will come out annually, if that. Then you have something that you could really measure and judge your investee companies based on that. And just talking about textual analysis, and we also use quite a lot of natural language processing to look at reviews and social media, where you can analyze these sources at scale, and then you can derive a sentiment based on some NLP models available. Actually, quite a lot of open source models, they are quite good. The challenge, I would say, you talk about difficulties we might encounter is where you have to clean the data and prepare such data. Think about social media. Yes, it's interesting and potentially useful, but you also want to make sure you're looking at reputable tweets rather than so-and-so, somebody, housewife saying this and that, right? So that's the bit where we will need to do a bit of cleaning and also adjust the bias. So things like Glassdoor, right? So if you think about a company review site, typically large companies tend to get a lot more reviews than smaller companies. So how do you adjust for that kind of size bias? And also, a bit of greenwashing that could be happening, right? So news might be reporting some PR campaign the company put out to create a very positive image surrounding their inclusion initiatives. So how do we, kind of peel back and understand if there's any substance underneath the hood? And that's the bit that we will have to address through the models and also the adjustment we have to make. And I think that will be the main challenges or difficulties you would encounter if you were to go down the route.
Right. And is it possible with the large organizations that have the resources to do that? You might even be, there's a bit of a cat and mouse going on. So, the PR campaign goes in, you're cleaning the data, there's more coming out. Are we there yet where there's sort of second order thinking?
Yeah, so we try to exclude any news articles that come out of PR, right? So if company make some announcement and they get reported in the news, we downweight those. We tend to outweigh, you know, kind of independently reported news surrounding those issues. So that kind of mitigates some of the noise, if you like.
Right.
Yeah, that's how we do it. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm breaking the rules. Can I ask you one more question before we move on?
Okay, sure.
How do you handle PR that is not necessarily about themselves, but that is kind of virtue signaling? So I'm a company and it doesn't really cost me much to, you know, ban a supplier for whatever reasons, but they only make up 0.01% of my supplier pool. But I get a lot of praise for having done that. So taking positive action that doesn't really cost me much, it's immaterial. I see a few of these now. It's a very special kind of impact washing, if you like. Is there any way to control for those? Materiality?
Yeah, so materiality is an interesting one because we also think about, like you mentioned, suppliers. So supply chain is another big topic about looking at how we see that sort of impact cascade down to, say, companies' ESG rating and so on. You're right, some company will be gaming the system by doing that. But just to say that we tend to use multiple sources, so we don't rely on a single source. So yes, there will be some noise, and that's something that we can't avoid. I mean, unless you really kind of go deep and say, okay, I'm just going to exclude this and that. Otherwise, because we get other sources to help us understand the S performance of the company, and that's where we could say, you know, at least we have something. It's more, shall we say, more grounded on multiple pillars rather than just rely on one single source.
Got it. Thank you, Helen. Ruben, if I could come to you now. Listening to Helen, you know, yourself as the CEO of a major company, do you believe that a measure of inclusion is something that shareholders care about or should care about? And if so, why? Is it for social justice reasons, or is it because there's a link to productivity? What's the value here?
Well, I think it has to be both. Like Grace mentioned earlier, you know, it's not just about productivity. I think there has to be some social element to it as well.
Right.
I'll come back to that, but I think from a productivity perspective, definitely I think it helps, you know, anyone if they're more diverse or more inclusive. You know, maybe not so much the direct productivity of an individual, but, you know, collaborative productivity when you need to innovate or when you need to find new sources of business. I think, you know, having a more inclusive environment there will create a lot more opportunities and more creativity when it comes to those kind of things. And in general, I think going forward, looking at the younger generations, the more inclusive your company is, the more likely you are to get better talent as well, right? So I think from that perspective, it's also going to be a big boost towards productivity. And it's probably, you know, with regards to, as I said earlier, you know, with regards to consumers, if consumers are going to be driven towards more inclusive companies, if we can measure them, and I think from that perspective, you know, sales will be going towards companies which are more inclusive, and from that perspective, we will have, you know, and that might lead to those companies becoming more productive as well. But the social element, I think, is also very crucial. And for me, as I said earlier, why we got involved was more about the social element, to be honest, and not so much on the productivity element. And my, ulterior motive for this, you know, like many other things in the world, the business side starts to get on it first, right? For example, just like the E, I think the business side got on the E a lot. I mean, of course, the consumer side tried to do it in a very big way, in a small way before, but they didn't get very far. And then suddenly when the business side starts to do it, it becomes mainstream almost. And I'm hoping also from an inclusive perspective, although there's a lot of inclusivity, you know, starting out in the consumer space right now, I think once the businesses start doing it and start measuring it, and you start living in places where it's not cool to be racist, then I think, you know, that might spread out to the rest of the world as well. So hopefully, you know, from a social justice perspective, you know, we can not saying we're going to end racism by doing this, but hopefully one day, 50 years from now, that racism doesn't become something we all talk about anymore, right? So, but it is a huge problem right now. It's a huge problem here where we are in the UK. It's a huge problem in Malaysia, where I come from. It's a huge problem in many, many countries. It's just different degrees of racism that's there. And that's why, for me, having something like this, pushing the agenda for this, hopefully will result in some change for productivity and business, but hopefully also, because it gets talked about more often and not taboo and pushed to the side, hopefully it then becomes, more, the whole world becomes more inclusive as a result. So I guess, it has to be both social and also productivity side.
Are you not concerned that this could become controversial? Is this a racism index? We go around telling companies you're 7.5 on the racism scale and you're 4.8.
Should it become controversial? I think racism is a big issue. And I think that's the whole idea. I mean, we're spending money here to make it controversial, to make it a big issue, right? I mean, at QPR, I think we are one of the most diverse clubs in the country. And yet there were people who were accusing us because some people didn't want to take the knee for Black Lives Matter about a year and a half ago, that we were not inclusive. And the ones who were accusing us of being not inclusive had board members where everyone was of a certain race, a certain gender, and a certain age group. So, how diverse were they? But, because they were louder than this, it seemed as though, they were more inclusive. But the truth is, they were not inclusive at all. And we were actually very inclusive. So I think that was, as I say, one of the sparks towards who's really inclusive out there, right? And who gets to call someone else not inclusive, and we can't really measure who really is and who really isn't. And I think that's why, and everyone, when it comes to gender, everyone seems to be okay to speak about it now. I mean, maybe 20 years ago, it was not as easy to speak about gender equalization before. But today it's very easy. But race is still very, very, people just don't want to talk about it. And I think the idea is to try and make it controversial so people do talk about it and people, get to address it up front, right? So, so I think that's the whole idea, to try and make it controversial.
I love it. We want to make it a big issue is a great quote. Thank you, Ruben. Fred, I could come to you now. So do you think this should be created? Should there be a credible measure of inclusion/exclusion at a company level? And if so, will it be of any use to institutional investors such as yourself?
So the answer is, do I think there should be a credible measure? Absolutely. Do I think it's a difficult thing to get done? Yes, difficult, but not impossible. And certainly, we're a relatively small organization, but we try and measure our inclusion. And, you can do that through surveys, through trying to track microaggressions, to, doing specific events, to tracking employee turnover. So I think it is possible to do it. And I think it's absolutely necessary to do it. And I think the investing world would appreciate that. Do I think investors would pay up for it? So in other words, if you had a credible measure of inclusion and one company rated higher on that scale than others, do I think people would be more eager to buy the debt of that company at cheaper levels? I think the answer is unequivocally yes. It makes perfect sense. Surveys have shown that a more inclusive organization makes better decisions, has better employee retention, better morale, lower turnover, all things that make you a better organization. So it comes to reason that you should be willing to pay up for that company's debt, and you should be willing to, pay a small price for a better organization. So I think generally it's accepted that a higher inclusion score would result in a better organization. I think most people get that. I think the issue is convincing them that there's a credible inclusion measure and that it can be trusted and that the data is not particularly noisy. So I think that's the biggest challenge we have ahead of us.
You're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute. So desirable but difficult is what you're saying, and I guess the proof is in the pudding is in the eating.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I would say very desirable. And Difficult, but not impossible. I think we'll certainly get there. There may be several iterations of it, but I think certainly doable.
Do you have a view on whether the recent emphasis on DEI, particularly in American institutions, perhaps in response to some of the high-profile incidents that we've seen in the news, have those been sincerely pursued, or have people been trying to game it?
You know, it's like everything else. I think the majority are sincere. There's absolutely some gaming involved, just, you know, as with every, you know, any sort of venture or anything new. I think people's efforts are sincere. I think it gets lost in the, anytime there's a large effort, the urge to game is so strong, even amongst otherwise well-meaning individuals. So I would say most of it is sincere. There's definitely some gaming involved as well.
Right. Thank you for that, Fred. And I'd like to come to Andrew now, but let me also just acknowledge that the questions are coming in thick and fast, which is great. Please, the rest of you, if you're not asking a question, if you want to upvote the ones you want to see answered first, that'd be great. And please keep the questions as short as possible. Andrew, similar question to you, but from your vantage point. Would some independent measure of a company's state of inclusivity be of use to your clients in wealth management or investment banking?
Absolutely, and I think your collection of panelists have articulated this incredibly clearly. I'm coming from the standpoint of a global perspective and also a very, very diverse firm with multiple different things that we do. But we always want a credible measure of inclusion as to what we ensure, and that really goes to the whole talent pool. Right, so I'm going to focus on this from talent. I think it's probably a good point to acknowledge Grace and the fact that the LSE has a leadership position in inclusion. This is an absolute fundamental change that we've seen, not for the last 2 years, to your point on what's going on in the public sort of world, but what the directionality of all businesses and particularly finance has taken. So we feel as a firm, this is our firm, by adding value by offering diverse perspectives. That starts with having the people around us that are different diverse perspectives. I really like what Ruben said. It's not just the color of your skin or your gender, but it could be your race or your religion, your sexual identity preference, maybe you're questioning that, or disabilities, right? All of those things have to be included in thinking about that diverse perspective, because our client base is like that on the other side of the table now. And both internally, culturally, as well as clients, everyone wants to have access to the diversity of thought and opinion, and diversity helps. And I fully agree with Fred that I think it's being gamed, but those people that are not, I prefer to have the gamers than the people that are just excluding it altogether, because that world is going to finish up in a very, very narrow band. I'll talk to the United States for a minute, even though I sit in London. 2045 is the date when the United States becomes a majority minority, meaning we will have more minorities collectively than the majority of white people. If you're in any sort of branded business, whether it's services or a consumer product, and you're not addressing the majority, obviously you're going to have a smaller pool of opportunities to facilitate it. And it's exactly the same in the services business. So why is diversity and inclusion so important to us? And it's three broad reasons. One is just talent. The war for talent that we have is so focused on diversity that if we don't have the right tools to attract that diversity, somebody else would. And that leaves to higher retention rates for other employees. People want to be in a diverse environment. Obviously, those diverse employees want to make sure that it's not all people looking exactly the same or sounding the same or the same gender. Wall Street used to be very white, male dominated. Couldn't be further from that now. So it means that employees feel that they're in a comfortable and inclusive, but most importantly, safe environment. Safe to do simple things like their own clothing or their own facial hair or the way they bring their food to the cafeteria or what they order and so forth. Feel safe. Second is innovation. Diversity is highly linked to innovation in our view. You only have to look at Silicon Valley and places like Tel Aviv and Stockholm, where it's not Swedes or Israelis or Americans providing the technology inputs with people from all over the world. I would say the same pre-pandemic for Shenzhen. That's been blocked, nothing to do with racism or lack of inclusion, but purely due to the pandemic. And that allows us to solve problems faster and also elevates performance. And thirdly is reputation. And this to me is absolutely critical. I mean, we're very proud at JP Morgan of a 217-year history. We want to continue that. Our consumers of our retail products at Chase and wholesale clients, they want to see a diverse nature and environment that we're linked to as a company. And they're going to consider an organization that they believe has ethical value. And I was shocked recently. I was part of a pitch for a significant piece of business from a very, very large European entity. We put the best team of 5 we could find. We felt that we had intellectually a great offering. We felt that the data pack we put together and what this particular piece of business was looking for, and we were successful. And when the chairman of that group called me to say we were successful, he said all those things that I just mentioned. He said, but you know what the real clincher is that you brought 3 women out of 5. Up until that point, I hadn't even considered we had 3. I just considered we'd had 4. My 4 colleagues were the best we could find, and I think that's a great metaphor for how the world has moved on. So I hope that answers the question.
That does answer the question. Thank you, Andrew, for a very comprehensive answer to that. Wow, 2045. So first 5 years before we hit net zero on the emissions front, we will have a minority majority in the US. Grace, an efficient market economist might say that if this was worth doing, it would have been done anyway. Why is it the case that the S of ESG is usually discussed in narrative terms as opposed to, why is it not so common to measure it?
Well, I think for the efficient market hypothesis, Mark, I would give to that the principal agent problem, which I think ultimately is the reason why we don't have S organically within companies, and also why we're not necessarily measuring it. So if we start, why doesn't it happen organically? And if you follow the kind of classic principal agent case, I think it's already been said that diversity is good for business. So if I'm working for a company and I want to create, I want to innovate, I want to assess risk better, it's probably a really bad idea for me to hire 4 or 5 people that are just like me, or 4 or 5 people that resemble me so much that I would call them close friends. Yet we do see this happening. I mean, we're here in the UK today, so I won't comment on the government, but from the most senior leaders in society, we do still see this happening. And I think fundamentally, it's really hard to police whether S is happening within a company's walls. So whether people are being inclusive, whether they're hiring beyond their own networks, whether they're hiring from diversity. And without hiring for diversity and being inclusive, you don't necessarily get business gains. So I think when Helen was talking, everything she said is spot on. And that's exactly what we're trying to measure, is the dynamic of whether within a company's walls, is there inclusion in a way that's actually good for business? And secondly, are people actually hiring diversely? If we think about the E versus the S, and I will say when we talk about inclusion, it also captures parts of governance, right? So if I'm working in a company where I'm being bullied or I'm being excluded, that's a governance issue rather than an S issue. But if we take the E versus S, I think the E has been very fortunate to have some heavyweight behind it. So in many countries, we have governments that are pressing for net zero. I know up to, I'm pleased for people who are here to hear about the environment, don't write negative things to me in the comments. Up to 2 years ago, I had a 4x4 car. And when the tax incentives came in, I switched to being electric. And that really was because of the government policy. And we do see much more demand for E because of government policies here in the UK, as well as just being a good person. I think next to that, the funds are doing an awful lot of work. So lots of pension funds will actually press for companies to be green and to be better behaved. And that has knock-on effect of the companies within them. I was asked by a group of journalists about a year ago whether or not my pension was green. And I logged on and I could tell them, yes, it was green from what the pension company tells me. But in that year, I've looked at 10 different indices, including one of the pension that I'm actually talking about. And they have really low correlations. So I think the E indices that are aggregated from multi-dimensions of E have some of the similar problems that we're talking about today with S. But what I will say is, I think the work that's being done on E, we've learned on the S. And I think for the last part of the S, given that we're at the very kind of starting ground, really, I think what Helen and I are doing is extraordinarily innovative. And what we would love is for other people to try to kind of get into creating S indices so that we actually progress the field at a much faster rate.
Thank you. Grace, when you said correlation, what was the correlation issue you mentioned?
Yeah, so if you look at how people actually measure the E in the aggregate, so taking across multi-dimensionals, and if you look just at very simple correlations across those indexes, so some of the major indexes have correlations that are less than 0.3. So in some ways, that would say to me actually that we don't yet know who's measuring E properly, in the same way that we don't know who's measuring S properly. The good thing for people who advocate for S is that there's a direct line to productivity, to profits, and to innovation, which again, if we think about it from a pure investor perspective, would make focusing on S possibly much more worthwhile than E.
Great, thank you. Let's take some questions. We have about 20 minutes. We'll take questions from the Q&A box. And I'm going to at least initially go with it's a bit like Eurovision Song Contest. So coming in with 12 points, we have Annabel Illingworth. The question is, can you expand on the current landscape around taxonomy or indicators for S, especially ones which could work across the board? Who is leading in this or doing it well?
I can kick off, Lutfey, if you want. I think, Annabel, the majority of the indicators that are capturing the S in the way this conversation has been speaking about it, so inclusivity, so kind of moving away from safety and other aspects of the S, really focus on diversity. So they count the women, they count people who are non-white within UK organizations, for example, the FTSE 100, and they basically make an assessment based on the diversity. I don't know anybody who is capturing S beyond 2 indexes that are using surveys within companies. And then all of the conversations that we've had around gaming so far so far today come into play. So the idea that if Lutfey is running an organization and I ask for particular measures on a survey, but there are big possibilities of gaming that subjective data. So the 2 things we're relying on are diversity, so counting people, or the second is to rely on survey data, and that's only 2 providers that I know of.
Helen, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, so I mean, we talk about review sites and so on, and then in terms of taxonomy, yeah, of course, it's quite I'll say quite taxing to get everything right. But if you talk about like counting the employees and so on, you could also think about I guess majority of people would have LinkedIn profile, right? So you can do it the other way rather than kind of focusing on the individual. I might say, okay, let me look at Citigroup across the entire LinkedIn universe. What sort of numbers are we seeing in terms of female representation, ethnic and minority representation, and so on. So that is a cleaner way, if you like, to do that. But if you're talking about review side, just specifically on that, yeah, so you do need to think about, okay, what are we trying to measure? Is it about gender? And what are the variation or different ways of saying the same thing? Are we talking about multinational? Are we talking about, do they make a inclusivity kind of statement? Or, when we're looking at the reviews, quite often people say, oh, I feel not valued and there's some discrimination going on. That sort of words we pick out, the positive and negative. And that's where we can then build up, it's almost like a bag of words or taxonomy, that lexicon, if you want to code it, to be able to say, okay, these are the words associated with inclusion, and typically is the positive or negative. And then we also use some other data science techniques that are using something called a knowledge graph to build a neural network where you can link all these terms together. So, if you say, okay, I'm talking about this specific terms of inclusion, what are the association companies have to that? And that could be built upon, using news. We can also look at how you can take in review data to build that connections. So think about it, if people are not familiar with the concept about knowledge graph, think about you do Google search, right? You type in a term and then you get a list of the result coming back. So behind the search, basically is a knowledge base, and you can say, I feed this particular news source into that, I can feed different other data sources into that and help you build the connection. Effectively, is there a lot of connections surrounding those terms. So you can use that to help you also identify what would be the right taxonomy to use. So in terms of who's leading, I would say, like Grace mentioned, we are doing something quite innovative in our mind. So I don't think we have come across anything like what we're doing.
Would you not use, for example, S&P Global or Refinitiv? You know, they have these, I think Refinitiv has a 4-factor set of labels. You've got workforce, human rights, community, product responsibility. S&P Global has workforce diversity, safety management, consumer engagement, and communities. Do you not think these are granular enough for what we're trying to achieve?
We do take those into account, but I think it's broader. So, when you talk about inclusion, yeah, those things that you mentioned, the S&P has, yes, they are important, but on top of that, we also wanted to get us a more nuanced version of that. So that's why we kind of dig deeper into review side and so on, to try to get more the ground up assessment, how people really feel when they were working in the company, rather than, like those are the things that you mentioned. It could also based on just looking at a company disclosed information. And as I mentioned, that is kind of subject to quite a bit of potential greenwashing and things like that. So that's why we try to, yes, we take that into account, but that's a kind of small part of that. Yeah.
Could I just add a little bit there? I think when it comes to measuring diversity, I think one of the key problems is also it changes from place to place, right? So what is diverse in the UK is not the same as what is diverse in say, Asia. So I think that's one of the key complex parts about trying to measure diversity as well. I think when it comes to gender, it's probably slightly easier because, those are similar well, at least a lot more similar between place to place. But I think when it comes to race or religion, it's very, very different. So what may be considered diverse in one place is completely not diverse in another place. So I think that adds, a bit more to the complexity as well.
There's a question from Michael. Does S stand for inclusion? I thought it was social, he says. The inclusion agenda is obviously important, but social is broader than that, surely. The answer is yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the S definitely is social, and social to Ruben's point just then. It's culturally social because we have so many differing inputs in all the regions of the world. And I think we also have a social issue of age. As people get older, they get typically more attached and conservative to their ways. The younger people want to explore more, and the influx of this, for all its downside, has been incredibly positive for the S side, because young kids, I was talking to somebody this week who'd grown up in a very, very rural part of the United States, didn't even have a conception of what Los Angeles was. He knew it was a city, he knew that Disneyland was there when he was at university, but never had visibly seen a picture, even in a book, of Los Angeles. Today, anybody anywhere in the world could see Los Angeles, London, or any other city. And I think that part of S is so important in the ESG debate. The fact that the future generations coming through are going to be guided by a lot of the decisions we make, whether in our businesses, whether in the academic world or in the political world, but they have a bigger opportunity than we've had to understand each other.
Right. It probably answers the next question I was going to look at, which is, are we not missing the aspect of S, which is beyond just employees, looking at local communities and supplier base? Are we going to be looking at that, Grace, in this index?
I think the answer is yes. So I think Helen spoke specifically to the index that we were building together in answer to a previous question. I think the S in ESG obviously takes into account what people are doing in the communities, how they are managing their supply chain, and a number of other factors. I think that there are gains to taking the perspective that Helen and I and the rest of the team are to looking within diversity and inclusion specifically, and the link towards productivity and earnings as a way to motivate investors. But separately, I think that there's lots of space in this market for other people to measure the other aspects of S, including the ones that you just said.
Question from Ekaterina says, would it be possible for any of the speakers to share on the screen a list of typical S parameters being looked at within ESG, or refer us to some kind of a list that we can get a bigger picture of what we're talking about? Any suggestions where people can go?
I think that would be nothing for the screen today, but if whoever asked the question wants to subscribe to our newsletter, those type of things are routinely sent into their inbox. So yes, I think that's the best way to proceed.
And to subscribe to that, it's at the TII website.
Yes. Yeah, Sasha, who's on in floating around in the green room, can put it into the chat. Great,
thank you. Okay, now we are going to points that are further down. So I'm taking a question from Paul Lee. Paul says we need reporting on S that's capable of being aggregated across portfolios. Two such metrics that have come up have so far come up. One, number of full-time employee equivalents, and two, the proportion of them that are paid enough to live on in dignity, local living wage. Can the panelists identify other useful metrics that can be aggregated in the same way?
Do you want to choose somebody, Lutfey?
No, anyone who feels comfortable answering, but I would have thought that the two that I mentioned, the Refinitiv and the S&P Global indices that I look at quite often at a company level, they are meant to be comparable, certainly within a single sector. So they score you relative to your peers in the sector of the industry that you're in. It's not very clean, but as in, it depends on how you've put the boundaries of your industry, and that is why you had, for example, Elon Musk complain about why he was dropped out and Exxon was in it, because the peer groups are different and they were looking at two different things. So Paul, for the moment, I will suggest Refinitiv and S&P Global. If you want to drop me an email, my email's on the LSE website. Maybe we can talk about this.
I guess the other thing I would add, Lutfey, is to encourage Paul to look at the annual reports. So annual reports from companies will say things that they will do in the future versus things that they're actually versus things that they've done in the current year. And a useful mapping is to think about what are they saying that they'll do in 2022, and then looking in 2023 and saying did they actually keep their word? And that's a way of proxying inclusion in a very, very rough way, but also taking into account virtue signaling, which is quite helpful. So does what I say in 1 year map the actions that I do in the future?
I see. Great question. Yeah, sorry.
From an inclusivity perspective, we've now had to start measuring and reporting how many, from a gender perspective, how many men and women we have in the company. So I think most companies will have to start doing that as well going forward. And that's something which is very easy to compare as well. So, and I think it's hard to hide the noise behind actual numbers specifically. And I think that could be used as comparison, especially from the gender perspective.
Right.
And there's two things to think about, Lutfey. So there's what Paul wants to do, this broad portfolio of companies where we measure inclusion across a big range. And then there is possibly what Fred is interested in, where you might be interested in it for 1, 2, or 3 companies, a small number. And if you're only interested in it for a small number of companies, it's actually easier to measure inclusion because it's easier to get much further into the weeds about specific companies and find out things about them. It's easier to take their data and it's easier to actually gain an edge that way. So everything isn't about speaking to portfolio investors. If we can speak to individuals who are putting large stakes in companies, I think that's quite useful too. And that's actually an easier task.
Right. I'm going to start. Yeah, please.
Sorry, I just want to add that, yes, we talk about the kind of basically company reported metrics, but I guess the main point also is that the fact that alternative data is helping us to assess company on equal footing, right? So we talk about review data, or we talk about news articles, and those are the things that you could measure across the stock universe. And yes, we do need to take into account the kind of sector inherited biases, right? So, in tech sector, you probably tend to have more male than female, perhaps. And then, these are the things that we do need to take into account. But I just wanted to highlight that in addition to company reported items, which can be sourced and looked at on an annual basis, there are other providers out there now looking at them much more frequently. So we ourselves use AI ESG data provider who measure diversity and inclusion on the every single day by looking at over 100,000 data sources. And then they map that to, I think somebody asked about the ESG. We use something called SASB materiality map. And so SASB stands for Sustainability Accounting Board, Reporting Board, standards. And then you can see the way they structure E and S and G. And so within that, they have 26 categories, and then with that social side, especially in terms of diversity and inclusion, this particular vendor we're partnering with, basically they can measure every single company within their stock universe, which is like almost 20,000 companies on every single day basis. So right. It is possible to do that, but yeah, it will be a combination of disclosed data and this more kind of AI inferred data source that we use.
Right. So we're coming towards the end of our time. There's still quite a few questions here, and they're all excellent questions. And I guess these are questions we will be dealing with. In fact, that's why the center was put up in the first place. So I hope you'll all subscribe to the newsletter and stay engaged with the center. I'm going to combine two questions into one as our last question, which is, on the one hand, there seems to be a backlash from more conservative stakeholders around, ESG and inclusion and all of these, progressive things. What do we think of the backlash on the one hand? And on the other hand, a simple question: how do we avoid wokeism, whatever that means?
Well, I'll make one quick comment. We focused a lot on the S, and the E is obviously critical, and you've got a great backdrop there.
Singapore.
I think it's the botanical gardens in Singapore. Singapore's a great example of getting the E right, but the G is something I think we have to be much more focused on. Without real governance and real structures and real learning of systems, whether it's in a family home, small company, business, local council, obviously large corporations and governments, we need good governance, right? Because governance allows a fair and equitable system to be translated into real dialogue, translated into easily understandable conditions set on a community or a family or whatever it may be. And that's why those three, I think should be broken out. But the G is something for another time that we would love to see more focus on. That'd be my view.
Excellent. I can see the next event being designed already. So any last words from anyone else before we bring this to a close?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that, to your point about, backlash on the conservative side, how to avoid wokeism, irrespective of what your personal views are, a lot of what's being driven is client focused. So our clients are telling us, you need to invest, with an ESG perspective in mind. And whether I agree with it or not, it's good business. So, and I think that's the way things get done. Market forces are such that, people have come to the conclusion that more diverse organizations generally function better. And if your clients are telling you, you need to be mindful of that, we then go to our clients and tell them, look, you need to be mindful of that. So I think inevitably, the sort of market forces in the end will probably drive this. And I think that's for the good.
I think I agree with that, actually. I think the bus has left. So I think that there might be a backlash of some people pushing against E, S, and G in different ways. And maybe the bus is moving too slowly, but it's not going to go backwards. So and eventually those people will leave, or they will convert. So I do think we're progressing too slowly, but I don't think that the backlash is going to stop that progression.
That's a wonderful note to end on. Anyone else? Last comments? No? Okay. So apologies to those of you whose questions we couldn't get to, but I really, really appreciate the enthusiasm and the volume of questions that have been put up. And thank you very much to the panel. This has been a rich, diverse, and illuminating conversation. I certainly learned much. So thank you again, and until next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.